The pink and blue balloons were still floating when I walked through the door of my own house and found 40 strangers eating my food, drinking my liquor, and celebrating a baby that wasn't mine. 3 weeks ago, my wife Nicole told me she was pregnant. 8 weeks along, she said, glowing in that way women glow when they deliver news that's supposed to change your life forever. And it did change my life, just not the way either of us expected. I held her face in my hands, kissed her forehead, and told her I loved her. I went to bed that night, feeling like a man who had everything. A beautiful wife, a house we'd built together over 6 years of marriage, a business I'd grown from nothing, and now a child on the way. What I didn't tell Nicole, what I hadn't told anyone yet, and because I was still processing it myself, was that 3 months earlier, my doctor had sat across from me in his office, cleared his throat, and told me that the results of my fertility testing were conclusive. Azoospermia, 0 sperm count. Not low, 0. I was completely, medically, irreversibly infertile. Had been, according to the specialist I saw afterward, likely for years, possibly since my early 20s due to a condition that had gone undiagnosed my entire adult life. I hadn't told Nicole yet because I was figuring out how to have that conversation. We'd been casually trying for a baby for about a year. Nothing desperate, nothing clinical, just the natural assumption that it would happen when it happened. I was going to tell her. I had an appointment scheduled with a counselor to help us navigate the news together. I was handling it like a man handles hard things. Carefully, responsibly, with a plan. And then Nicole told me she was pregnant. I did the math that same night, lying in the dark while she slept beside me with her hand resting on her still flat stomach. I am infertile. She is pregnant. Those two facts cannot coexist if I am the father. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for 7 hours and felt something inside me, something that had taken 6 years to build, begin to crack at the foundation. I didn't confront her immediately. I know that surprises some people when I tell the story. They expect me to say I flipped the mattress over or drove through the night screaming. But I'm not built that way. I think before I act. I gather before I strike. My father raised me to be precise, not reckless. So instead of blowing everything up on emotion alone, I did something smarter. I called my doctor the next morning and requested a formal written report of my test results. Official, signed, dated, on clinic letterhead. I had it in my hands within 48 hours. I read it 3 times. I put it in a manila envelope and locked it in my desk drawer at the office. And I waited. I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before, because when you love someone completely, you stop looking for cracks. You assume the structure is sound. You stop checking. I started checking. I went back through 6 months of phone records on our shared plan. I found a number that appeared repeatedly. Late nights, early mornings, lunch hours when she'd told me she was in meetings. The number wasn't saved under any name in her phone. But I'm a businessman. I know people. I had a contact run the number in 2 hours. It came back to a man named Derek, 34 years old, personal trainer, worked at the upscale gym Nicole had joined 8 months ago. 8 months. Right around the time we'd started casually trying for a baby. I didn't call Derek. I didn't confront Nicole. I sat with it, cold and burning at the same time, the way only real betrayal feels, like swallowing something frozen and on fire simultaneously. 6 years. We had built 6 years together. I remembered the night she cried at her father's funeral, and I held her for 4 hours without moving. I remembered driving through a snowstorm to pick her up when her car broke down on the highway at midnight. I remembered the weekend we painted the nursery. The nursery, God. We'd painted it 2 years ago just because we were optimistic, because we were in love, because we thought we were the kind of couple that lasted. And now this. She started planning the gender reveal party without consulting me. That alone should have registered as strange. Nicole was meticulous about including me in everything, or she used to be, before guilt started making people behave in ways that seem slightly off if you're paying attention. She said she wanted it to be a surprise for me too. "You'll find out the gender the same time as everyone else," she said, touching my arm with a familiarity that now felt like performance. I said that sounded wonderful. I smiled. I meant neither. What Nicole didn't know was that 2 days before the party, where I had visited a private medical testing facility across the city, one that offered non-invasive prenatal paternity testing, I had submitted my DNA sample along with documentation of Nicole's pregnancy from the OB records I'd accessed through our shared medical account. They told me results would take 5 to 7 business days. They came back in 4. The results confirmed what I already knew. I was not the father. The probability was listed at 0.00%. The report was thorough, clinical, and absolute. I printed 2 copies. One went into the manila envelope with my infertility report. The other I folded neatly and placed in the interior pocket of the jacket I planned to wear to the party. I got dressed that Saturday afternoon, like a man going to a business meeting he intends to win. Or the house smelled like catered food and fresh flowers when I pulled up. I could hear music through the front windows, something upbeat and festive. There were cars parked along both sides of our street, more than I'd expected. Nicole had told me it would be small, intimate, close family and friends. Instead, I counted at least a dozen cars I didn't recognize, and several I did. Her mother's SUV, her sister's sedan, people from her work, people from our neighborhood, and presumably Derek somewhere in that crowd, though I didn't know that yet for certain. I walked in through the front door of my own house without knocking. The living room had been completely transformed. Pink and blue balloons in clusters of 10, streamers, a table covered in themed food, a banner that read, "He or she, wait and see," and in the center of it all, my wife, was standing in a white sundress, laughing at something someone had just said, one hand resting on the small swell of her stomach that was only just beginning to show. She saw me, and her expression shifted. Something flashed across her face that she recovered from quickly, replaced with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "James, you're early." "Am I?" I looked around the room. Seems like I'm exactly on time. People turned to look at me. I recognized Nicole's mother, Linda, near the food table, and her sister Vanessa by the window. Some of her work colleagues stood in a cluster near the kitchen doorway. And then I saw him, standing near the back wall with a drink in his hand, well-built, early 30s, looking like a man who wasn't sure whether to stay or run. Derek. He didn't know who I was yet. I could tell by the way he held his ground. I knew everything. Nicole came toward me, arms opening for a hug, still performing. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, and I let her hug me because I was still in control of this situation. And being in control meant not moving until the moment was exactly right. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said. I put my hand on the small of her back and smiled at the room. Wouldn't have missed this for anything in the world. The next 30 minutes were the most disciplined of my life. I shook hands. I accepted food I didn't eat. I made small talk I didn't mean. I watched Derek watching Nicole, and Nicole carefully not watching Derek in the way people don't watch someone they're desperate not to be caught watching. The geometry of their guilt was visible to me now that I knew where to look. But he stood at angles that kept her in his peripheral view. She moved through the room with the unconscious awareness of where he was at all times. I watched it all and said nothing and waited. The reveal was set for the back garden. 60-odd people crowded around a table with a large white box on it. Inside, according to tradition, colored balloons would float out when opened. Nicole stood at the table, beaming, and someone handed her a microphone. An actual microphone, because apparently we were doing this at full production value. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice warm and practiced. "This baby is already so loved and I'm so grateful. I'd like to say something." My voice cut clean across the garden. Every head turned. Nicole's smile froze. I walked through the crowd, which parted for me without me having to ask, and I stepped up beside the table. I looked at Nicole first, directly, completely, without flinching, and I watched her face go from frozen to afraid in the span of 2 seconds. Then I looked out at the crowd. "Most of you know me," I said. "I'm James, Nicole's husband, the man who's been working 80-hour weeks to pay for this house, this party, this catered food, and everything else that makes this life look the way it does." I kept my voice steady. Not loud, not shaking, just clear. "I have 2 documents in my pocket. I'd like to share them because I think they're relevant to this celebration." "James." Nicole's voice was a warning wrapped in a plea. "Please don't." "The first," I said, reaching into my jacket, "is a certified medical report from a specialist fertility clinic, dated 14 weeks ago." I unfolded it and held it up, then set it flat on the table where anyone nearby could see it. "It confirms that I have azoospermia, 0 sperm count. I am completely infertile. I cannot father children. This has been the case, medically, for an estimated 3 to 5 years." The garden went silent in the specific way that only genuine shock produces, not the polite quiet of a pause. The airless, total silence of 60 people absorbing something that doesn't compute. "The second document," I continued, unfolding the second paper with the same unhurried precision, "is the result of a prenatal paternity test conducted 4 days ago. It confirms with absolute certainty that I am not the father of the baby Nicole is currently carrying." Nicole's hand flew to her mouth. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped. What Linda, her mother, said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the whole garden to hear. I set both documents side by side on the table next to the gender reveal box and stepped back. "So, I'm not sure whose baby we're celebrating today," I said. "But it isn't mine." Nicole had started crying. Not the graceful, photogenic kind of crying, the ugly, collapsing kind, the kind that happens when everything a person has been holding falls at once. "James, I can explain—" "You don't need to explain anything to me, Nicole." I looked at her with something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment. Not rage, not satisfaction, just an enormous and permanent clarity. "I already know. I've known for a while. I just wanted everyone else to know too." I looked across the garden and found Derek, who was no longer standing casually against the wall. He was standing rigid, face pale, holding his drink like it was the only fixed point in the universe. Our eyes met. He looked away first. "Whoever the father is," I said to the general crowd, "he's welcome to the house too, since I won't be needing it." I picked up both documents from the table, folded them back into my jacket, and turned to Nicole's mother, who was standing with tears on her face and her hands pressed together like she was praying. "Linda, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I genuinely mean that." Then I walked back through the crowd, through the house, and out the front door. I sat in my car for exactly 4 minutes. Not because I was composing myself, I was composed. I sat because I wanted to feel the weight of that moment fully before I drove away from it. 6 years, a house, a life, gone, and I was the one who'd ended it with 2 pieces of paper and 30 seconds of controlled speech. And somewhere behind me, in the garden I'd built, and the home I'd paid for, my wife was standing next to a gender reveal box full of balloons in the color of a child that wasn't mine. I drove to my office. not because I had work to do on a Saturday afternoon, but because the office was mine, built entirely by my own effort, carrying none of her presence, and I needed a space that was clean of her. I sat at my desk, called my attorney, and had him on the phone within 20 minutes. By Monday morning, divorce proceedings were initiated. By Tuesday, I had a forensic accountant reviewing our joint finances. By Wednesday, I had moved the proprietary accounts from our shared banking over to a business account in my name alone. All of it entirely legal, all of it exactly what my attorney advised. Nicole tried to call me 11 times that Saturday night. I watched the phone light up with her name, and I felt nothing that resembled the urge to answer. Her sister Vanessa texted me. "James, please call us. She wants to explain." I responded once. "My attorney will be in touch." I didn't respond again. My older brother, Raymond, showed up at my apartment. I was staying at a short-term furnished place near the office, at 9 that night with a bottle of scotch, and the good sense not to say anything stupid. Raymond was 10 years older than me, an ex-military man with a quiet authority that I'd always respected. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, poured 2 glasses and said, "How are you holding up?" "Clearly," I said. He nodded. "Good." He drank. "What do you need?" "Help going through the financials and someone to talk to Derek." Raymond set his glass down and looked at me with the particular stillness that meant he was listening completely. "What kind of talking to?" "The legal kind," I said. "I want him to understand that there are potential legal consequences to his involvement in this situation, depending on what was said to Nicole about his relationship status." I had already found out, through the same contact who'd identified Derek's number, that Derek was in a long-term relationship with a woman named Amanda, who had a 5-year-old daughter. She didn't know about Nicole. Of course she didn't. Amanda deserves to know. Raymond picked his glass back up. "I'll handle it." He did. By Sunday evening, Amanda had been informed, not by me, not with drama, but by a quiet, factual conversation that gave her the information she needed to make her own decisions. I heard later that Derek came home Sunday night to find his belongings in the hallway and a note on the door. I didn't celebrate it. It wasn't about Derek. It was about a woman who deserved the truth. Nicole's mother called me the following Monday. Linda was a decent woman. I had always liked her, which made this harder. She cried for the first 2 minutes. I let her. When she stopped, she said, "James, I am so sorry. I had no idea." "I know, Linda," I said. "This isn't anything you did." "She wants to talk to you. She says she wants to explain." "There's nothing she can explain that changes the outcome," I said. Not cruelly, just honestly. "Nicole made choices. I'm making mine. The marriage is over." A long silence. Then, "I understand." That was the last conversation I had with anyone from Nicole's family. What followed was 3 months of the most focused, productive work I had done in years. I know that sounds strange. I know people expect the story to include a period of devastation so complete that it flattens you. Sleepless nights, missed meals, emotional wreckage. There was some of that, privately. I'd be lying if I said there weren't evenings in that furnished apartment where the quiet became louder than it should have been, where I sat with a drink and thought about the version of my life I'd expected to be living, the nursery we'd painted, the name we'd half-jokingly argued about, and the future that had been built on a foundation I hadn't known was hollow. But grief, in my experience, is not something you perform. It's something you feel in your own time. And then you get up and you work. And I worked. The divorce was finalized in just over 3 months. Nicole didn't contest anything meaningful once she understood that my attorney had been thorough and my documentation was complete. The house was sold. I took my share and immediately reinvested it into a commercial property I'd had my eye on for 2 years. The business, which had been quietly growing for 4 years, suddenly had my full, undivided attention for the first time, and it responded the way things respond when you give them everything. It doubled its revenue in a single quarter. I hired 2 new team members. I closed 3 contracts I'd been dancing around for months. I rebuilt my physical routine, 5 mornings a week in the gym, the kind of consistent, serious training that produces visible results in 60 days. I cut alcohol almost entirely. I slept 8 hours a night with a discipline I'd never applied to sleep before. By month 4, I barely recognized myself in photographs, and I mean that in the best possible way. The softness that comfortable married life had gradually deposited had been replaced by something harder and cleaner. My clothes fit differently. I stood differently. People at meetings started commenting on it, not on what had happened, but on the version of me that was sitting in front of them. My close friend Daniel, who had known me since university, had met me for lunch in month 5 and stared at me across the table for a full minute before speaking. "You look like you just came out the other side of a war," he said. "I did," I told him. "And?" "I won." He grinned. "Good. I want to be specific about one thing because I think it matters. I didn't reconstruct myself as revenge against Nicole. I reconstructed myself because I had spent 6 years unconsciously organizing my priorities around a partnership that had turned out to be fictional, and when that structure was removed, what remained was the original version of me, the one that had built everything from scratch before she was ever in the picture. And he was, frankly, better equipped than I'd remembered. The business recognition came in month 6. I was shortlisted for a regional business award in my industry, something I'd been in the orbit of for 2 years without quite landing. This year, I was the recipient. The ceremony was a black tie event at a hotel downtown. I went alone, sat at my table with 2 of my team members, and when they called my name, I walked to the stage and shook the presenter's hand and said thank you into the microphone and meant it. My team took a photo afterward and posted it to the company's page. The comments were full of congratulations from clients, partners, colleagues. One of the first comments was from Linda, Nicole's mother, who wrote simply, "Proud of you, James, always will be." I read it twice, and then put my phone in my pocket and went to celebrate with my team. It was 3 weeks after the award ceremony that Nicole resurfaced. I was coming out of a coffee shop on a Thursday morning, carrying 2 cups, one for me, one for the architect I was meeting about the commercial property renovation, when I nearly walked into her on the pavement outside. She looked exhausted. That was the first thing I noticed. Even before the bump, which was substantial now, 6 months in, was the exhaustion she wore on her face like weather. She wasn't dressed badly or falling apart in any visible way, but the shine was gone. The performance was gone. She just looked like a tired, frightened woman who had done something she couldn't undo. I stopped walking. She stopped too. We stood on the pavement with the morning crowd moving around us and looked at each other for the first time since I'd walked out of our garden. "James," she said. "Nicole." I shifted the coffees in my hands. "When you look tired." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I am." She looked at my face, then quickly away. "You look—" She stopped. "How are you doing?" I asked, because I'm a human being and she was visibly struggling and I wasn't built to be cruel. Her jaw moved. "Derek's not involved. It doesn't matter. I'm handling it." She pressed her lips together. "I hear you won the award. Raymond told my mother." I did. Another silence. She looked at my face again, longer this time, and I could see exactly what she was doing. She was taking inventory of what she'd lost, the way people do when they have no more arguments left to make and only regret remaining. Her eyes were shining. "I'm so sorry," she said. The words came out stripped of everything, No strategy, no angle, just the bare fact of them. "I know," I said. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything." She touched her stomach, almost involuntarily. I needed to say it. To your face." I looked at her for a long moment. Not with hatred. Not with satisfaction. With the specific and permanent neutrality of a man who has already made peace with something and doesn't need to revisit it. "I hope you and the baby do well," I said. And I meant it, in the limited way that you can mean something when it no longer involves you. "Take care of yourself, Nicole." I walked past her and crossed the street and didn't look back. That evening I sat in my apartment, a nicer one now, one I'd chosen entirely for myself, with high ceilings and a view of the city, and no decorative choices made by compromise. And I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, poured one glass, and sat by the window. I thought about the version of myself that had stood in that garden and placed 2 documents on a table next to a gender reveal box. I thought about how clearly I had seen everything in that moment. Not just Nicole's betrayal, but the 6 years of accommodation, the gradual erosion of the man I'd been before the marriage, the way love can become, if you're not careful, a kind of slow disappearance. I wasn't angry anymore. I hadn't been angry in months. What I felt instead was something quieter and far more powerful, the deep, settled satisfaction of a man who had been handed the worst possible situation and had responded with precision, dignity, and purpose. I had not begged. I had not broken. I had not allowed someone else's catastrophic failure of character to become my catastrophic failure of self. I had gathered the facts. I had acted at the right moment. I had ended it cleanly, and I had built something better from the wreckage. Not to prove a point to Nicole, but because building was what I knew how to do. A year later, it felt appropriate to consider the full year. The commercial property was fully renovated and generating income above projection. The business had grown to a team of 9, with a 10th hire scheduled. I had spoken at 2 industry events and been asked back for a 3rd. I trained 5 mornings a week without exception. I had a circle of people around me who were genuine. Raymond, Daniel, a handful of others who had shown their quality during the hard months by simply showing up without needing me to perform being fine. I heard, and through the tangential transmission of mutual acquaintances that small cities always produce, that Nicole had moved into a smaller apartment near her sister. That the baby, a boy, I was told, had arrived healthy. That Derek was out of the picture entirely and had relocated for work, which was perhaps the only decent thing he'd done throughout the whole situation. That Nicole was managing. Quietly, with difficulty, but managing. I heard all of this the way you hear news about a country you used to live in. Registered it, noted it, moved on. There was a woman. I'll mention this because it happened, and it was real. Her name was Claire, and I met her at an industry dinner in month 9. She was sharp and direct, and laughed at things that were actually funny, and she had no patience for performance in any form. We had dinner twice before I told her, openly and without drama, what had happened with Nicole. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said, "That must have been a very hard year." "It was the best year of my life," I said. She tilted her head. "How?" "Because I found out who I was when the ground disappeared," I said. "That's the kind of information you can't get any other way." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's either the healthiest thing I've ever heard, or a very sophisticated way of not dealing with it." "Which do you think it is?" She looked at me for a long moment. "The first one." We were careful with each other. That was the right word for it. Not slow out of fear, but deliberate out of respect. She wasn't a rebound, and I made sure she knew it, and I made sure she experienced that in how I acted, not just in what I said. Men who have been through real loss either become smaller or they become better at the things that matter. I had worked too hard on the second option to let it go to waste. The last time I thought about Nicole in any sustained way was on a Tuesday morning, about 14 months after the party. I was signing documents on the commercial property refinancing, a significant deal, the kind that represented a real threshold in what I was building. And my attorney made a joke about how far things had come in a year, and for a moment I saw the whole arc of it clearly. I had been a man with everything arranged around a lie, living a life that felt stable because I hadn't tested the foundations. Oh, and then the foundations had failed, spectacularly and publicly, and I had stood in the rubble with 2 pieces of paper in my pocket and made a choice. I would not be diminished by this. I would not let someone else's betrayal become the defining chapter of my story. I signed the documents, shook my attorney's hand, walked out into a clear Tuesday morning, and called Raymond. "The property deal closed," I told him. "That's excellent," he said. "I'll buy the first drink." "You will," I said. I stood on the pavement outside the attorney's office with the sun on my face and the city moving around me in the way cities do, indifferent and constant and full of possibility. And I thought, I won. Not against Nicole, not against Derek, not against anyone. Against the version of myself that could have collapsed under this. Against the part of me that could have let betrayal define me, shrink me, make me afraid of what came next. That was the only victory that had ever mattered. I put my phone in my pocket and walked toward whatever came next, without looking back.